didn't get to the extent of separately. These are categories that are used within the OFM methodology for doing a risk assessment. In many cases, we will break that down even further to say exactly where they happen and if the information is available, why it happened. So, talking about the risk assessment methods, the risk assessment used by the Office of the Fire Marshal and the one we completed is qualitative rather than quantitative. It gives an idea of what's happening. It is dependent upon the information at the Office of the Fire Marshal. It's dependent on the knowledge of the fire department, which is usually pretty reliable, but it doesn't really have a quantitative element to it where you can take data and parse data down to the extent that you can really determine where the issues are and what needs to be approached. So the best type of risk assessment is one that uses data gathered in a relational database. And this is important because fire services don't have a relational database of that nature. And it's certainly something that the chief has talked about. One of the first things he brought up to us is the record management system. And we agree with him that the record management system has to be improved. So what this graphic shows is that there are several steps to gathering information. And this, I mean, we're talking mostly about fires here because that's the greatest risk to the public. But this goes for any type of response, whether that's medical response by the fire department or accidents, rescues, water rescues, any kind of rescues. First of all, a call is placed to 911. Somebody recognizes an emergency and calls 911. Fire responds, that's item 2. Work takes place at the scene, and then they return to the station. Information about the times and the amount of time spent on scene and so on is gathered all that way through. What isn't available is the outcome record, which says what did the fire department do at the scene and what kind of equipment did it use, how many people were really needed at the scene, were more people needed, did they arrive in time, and so on. And much of that is available in notes that senior officers take, and it's a note form. But that's not a relational database, and that's one of the drawbacks of the risk assessment under the current circumstances. So it's a bit of a fallback. So it means that crucial decision-making, information about efficiency and effectiveness, the types of equipment, the number of staff, the vehicles that are required, the actual risk to the public isn't fully available because of that. So that, I mean, as we say, the chief knows that. The chief talked about it at the beginning of this project. And that's one of the things that obviously I think he'll want to work on over the next few years. So some conclusions and recommendations. And thank you for that. That's probably the last we'll need the screen for. I think most importantly, the city can feel comfortable that the fire department has taken some positive steps towards developing a community risk assessment, and also the community-wide hazard identification and risk assessment. And that one's still ongoing, and we're going to be continuing to work with the fire department and the city on developing a new, what's called a HIRA, hazard identification and risk assessment. And we'll be working on that with them over the next few weeks and months. A positive of the exercise is that the city and fire services not so much have achieved an awareness of areas that should be more thoroughly reviewed, but I think have been able to find out due to the information that we've all gathered, fire department and the consultants, and it just confirmed what fire services usually know. The risk assessment should be more focused as to where and how resources are deployed. This is a generalized risk assessment. It's a good start in the province. It's a requirement by the Office of the Fire Marshal, and it's a good start, but it's not indicative of where resources should be focused within a municipality and within Cornwall. So, I think we've talked about the high-level measurements of fire prevention under the current system, but we also need to reinforce the idea that Cornwall Fire Services needs a robust record management system. That's a difficult thing to accomplish. We certainly have talked about it, and we're available to help even further. We do have some contacts within some of the companies that develop these record management systems. We know the shortfalls of some of them, and we're happy to help with the fire department as they move forward. The continued work on the community-wide hazard identification and risk assessment, the HIRA, will end up with a guideline document for the city that can be easily updated in the future, and that one is well on its way. And the other thing that comes along with the community risk assessment is one part of overall analysis of what's needed in the fire service. The other part of that is a master plan, and we assume that at some point in the future the city will move ahead with the fire master plan. And that will probably cement a good 5-year process. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we get to questions, can I have a motion to receive the presentation, please? Councillor Good, Councillor Gardner. Questions? Councillor Sabourin? Okay. Councillor Gardner.
Still on the motion.
Okay.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, through you, Mr. Mayor, could you go back to the original map of, I think it was the second, that one there. Now, the question I have for you gentlemen, both, do you attribute that center town, southern part of the city to older buildings? Because to me, the outskirts are all new residents and less likely to have fires. So do you concentrate on that one area, that center area, south area?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardner. Certainly, you know, the document that's before us tonight is the areas in which we've had our responses over the last number of years. And to try to attribute those, each one, you know, to try to look at the cause and what effects that individual fire had on neighboring homes, damage to neighboring homes because of the close proximity, it was really a case-by-case process, because each one on their own merit had the incident, but the cause of the incident each time is varied. It's not the same reason each time. So it's difficult to pinpoint, you know, the whys and the hows, but certainly, as John mentioned, the need for public education and prevention in those areas is certainly above, you know, certainly the entire city deserves that same, but we need to create a focused process for that area of the city.
I guess that when I was looking at that map earlier today, that was what I saw. In the east end, far east end, in the west end, you've got all new homes, in the north end, all new homes. And there aren't as many red dots in those areas as you have in the center of the city. So thank you for the answers. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McIntosh, then Councillor Gunjo.
Yeah, I'm looking at the map, and I'm looking where the proposed fire station is. And my first one, before I ask that, Chief, how many men do you have at Station 2 on a normal shift?
So typically the stations are split up, headquarters station. So just for council's purpose, where we have proposed station, as you alluded to, Councillor, that is the location of Tollgate and Brookdale where the new fire station is proposed to be constructed. So typically, if we have 14, we would have 8 at headquarters and the remainder at Station 2.
Okay, going back to where I was saying, so I'm looking at the map, and very few fires up where that proposed station is. And I'm asking myself, why would we build a station where there aren't any fires? Why wouldn't we stay where we are when we're closer to where all the fires are? And I know in the past, probably the last 30 years, various reports said you don't have the north end covered. And that time they were talking about a third station, which isn't going to happen in the near future. Would you agree with that there could be a problem, not a problem, but a disadvantage if you had a fire down where the massive red dots are, and you only have 6 men to respond to that fire right away, and you have to pull the rest in, the other 8 in from, or maybe even fewer than that, from way up there.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor McIntosh, certainly the concerns or the questions you have tonight, I believe have been questions that have been debated and asked several times over the last, several years, where this property was kind of identified and the consensus was to move forward at this location. I think certainly council has chosen this location as the future of fire headquarters, and we may find that by deploying additional personnel at Station 2 and less personnel at headquarters, or variations thereof. But certainly, I think it's more what we need to, in conversation with John, and I welcome his comments to this, because I think it's more than looking at, when we look at suppression is certainly what, if you say, a fire service, what does a fire service do? They're suppression firefighters, they put out fires. But when you look at the act and what our core functions are, prevention, education, that is what the fire code really tells us is what our core function is. And what this, what this tells me is that we have a problem in that area, and what we need to do is we need to get out and be more in our public's face with our prevention and education program, and that's what we need to put the money and energy into, and not suppression firefighters waiting to put out fires in those areas.
Yeah, still, when my house is on fire, I'm not thinking that maybe they should have a better fire prevention system. I want guys who are fighting the fire real fast.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. What you're seeing here are structure fires. 40 a year, I think, or 30 a year. I can't remember exactly. What we haven't mapped here, and what we usually do, but not necessarily under this sort of risk assessment, are things like grass fires and bush fires, medical calls, traffic accidents, various things like that, which may not require the same rapidity of response as structure fires, but still require some urgency. And so when you get more into the master plan stage, when you start looking at all these things and sort of back up from other fire services around, and automatic aid and mutual aid, and then one of the things that's really, and the chief just talked about it, that's the most urgent thing to do is to reduce structure fires in particular. Fire is mostly a social issue, and I don't mean like a social services issue, but it's a social issue because there's not very many accidental fires. Somebody has done something, made a mistake, and a fire ensues. Could be many things. It could partially be the age of a building and wiring. It could be just something completely different. Those are all things you have to take into account in making a decision as to where a fire station is going to be. So
I bring that up only because the guys who fight the fires were opposed to that site. And the reason why they said they were opposed to it, because they were so far away from where fires happen. That's, they said it. They've said it many times, that they do not like that station there, and they refer to it as a safety issue, life and death issue.
I don't want to, I mean, we're not here to contradict anybody or to have that, depth of discussion, because as I say, much of it is in a master plan sort of analysis. The whole idea, though, is that if you have 40 fires this year with the right efforts, and I want to call it frontline efforts, because frontline aren't necessarily just the suppression staff. Frontline are prevention and public education, and suppression staff doing prevention and public education. So the whole idea is if you do have 40 fires a year, next year it should be 35 or 37. The year after that, it should be 30. The year after that, even further down, it'll plateau somewhere.
Yeah.
But, so the idea of where you put the fire station has to take a lot of things into account, not just where fires are today, but what you can do from a strategic point of view and from a fire prevention point of view to change the face and nature of the fire service, so to speak, so that everybody can be happy about fewer and fewer fires and emergencies happening.
One last question. I just scribbled this down. You had mentioned where resource should be focused. What do you mean by that? Which resources?
Fire resources, and when we talk about fire, we talk about all resources in fire and focusing a reduction. When you get to response, that's the last gasp, that's your last chance sort of thing. What you want to do is not have as many incidents, and we're talking about fires, but all sorts of incidents. And fire service over the years, if you look back 50 or 60 years or 200 years, if you want to do that, it's just different equipment. Fire services have been in a response mode because that was the nature of the fire service. There's fewer and fewer fires because of changes in building codes and various other things, even though, there is composite material in new buildings. But there's fewer and fewer fires. I mean, we can show you charts drop by the thousands. What you want to see is that continuing to a certain point. It will plateau. But the idea is to concentrate resources on protecting the public, not by response only. That's the last resort.
Similar to police.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, think of police. If you looked at police, and sorry I'm warming up to this, but if you look at police, you could say police should perhaps be in a police station, and people could call the police when there's an emergency, and the police could rush out and do something about it. And that's what fire departments have done many years ago, 60, 70 years ago, because it came from volunteer services where that was the thing, and it's continued. And so, as the chief said, he's looking at changing this to prevention and public education and reducing the risk to the public.
Yeah. We have a plan in place, and as a result of landlord registry proposal being defeated this council, we went to a plan where the fire department, building code people would get together and do inspections in selected areas, I'll say, of the community. And you say, good plan?
I say what?
Is it part of I'm talking about when we come to prevention, okay? They now they're putting together a team that'll include the building inspector's office, Matt's department, and they're going to select, I assume, certain areas of town we're going to inspect buildings. I don't think we've been doing much of that lately.
Do you want to take it?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McIntosh. And we'll call it this seems like this is the approach that needs to be taken, because fire department, as we go in and do prevention work, can't speak to bylaw-related matters. We're not bylaw enforcement officers. So by having the joint task force, we'll call it, attend these properties and be instead of reactive, be proactive in trying to reduce fire load on porches, to reduce fire load on properties from a bylaw perspective by going in and completing smoke alarm checks and those types of things. That's the intent, and targeting these blocks and completing these inspections.
Yeah, I think that's a great advancement, and the sooner it starts, the better.
That's right.
Anyway, thanks.
Councillor Goodjoe?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a few questions for you. First, I would like to join Councillor McIntosh about these facilities that we want to build in Tollgate. A quick scenario. The facility is there, we have a fire in the center, and we have a train that is stuck in the toll gate. You see what is mean? To get to the center, the service, the fire is going to go through, the way is going to be very long because of the train. Did you think about this scenario? Or a problem in Tollgate and a train stuck in the, you see what train I'm talking about, in the lane on Tollgate. It's going to be very tricky for you because it's going to make the way very long to get in this situation. So you understand that it can be a major problem for the security of those people in the other side of the train. You
Certainly.
agree with me?
Certainly, I do. And through you, Mayor, I'm sorry I was waiting. Wasn't sure if question number 2 was coming, but I'll
Yeah.
certainly, I'll talk to this one first. And you know, certainly again, and I don't want to use this as a means, but the fire station locations certainly has been deemed as the right location by council. And hence, and that's why we've moved forward with the plans and construction, which will be coming aware to council here very shortly. And so, yes, there are certainly the possibility of situations where a train or an accident, but there are alternate routes, and we do have the second station that will be responding as well. And these are situations and things that we're going to have to be very aware of and roll with, dependent on the situation that's before us. You know, we can look at a multitude of different, you know, kind of what ifs as our response personnel leave that station or that proposed station, but it doesn't negate that station 2 attending as well and starting that initial fire attack. So we're not leaving our citizens vulnerable by any stretch, and that second station will be rolling in dependent on that location.
Okay, thank you. Second question. During this presentation, we spoke about the location, but did you think about the time? Because we have the answer about where, but about when, did you think about that? Because we can have more fire during the summer because people are barbecuing, for example. This is going to impact the strategy that we're trying to put in place. Or maybe, you see, it can be, the fire can increase during the winter because the cold or the heating system are running every time. So did you think about this time? When do we have an increase of fire problems in the community?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor, just for clarity on the question, so are we talking again about the location of?
No. About this, the number of fire
In that area?
Yes.
Do you want to speak to that just on the time of year on?
We didn't go into that, and thank you. We didn't go into that analysis. That's usually the type of analysis we end up doing again in a master plan when we get right into that detail. But normal circumstances in a master plan, or you know, a further beyond this stage of risk assessment, let me put it that way, is that we would show the month, day of the week, and time of day that fires happen, and so you know, to graph that actual numbers, and we usually plot that on a 5 to 7 year basis. So we see if there's a trend difference and trend analysis on those type of things. We have not done it yet in this case.
But you agree that it can be an important parameter to get inside the...
Yes, certainly, and you know, just to give an example, we looked at grass fires for a client because they had a couple of hundred grass fires a year. We found out that almost all of them happened in April and May, and many of them were concentrated in the school. And, you know, it was one of those things where people were walking along the path, and for one reason or another, a fire came about, whether it was purposeful or not. So, yeah, and we also found out that they all happened, I shouldn't say all, 80% of them happened between 2 and 7 o'clock, April and May.
Okay, thank you very much.
Monday to Thursday. So, yeah, you can identify all those things, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor McDonald, then Councillor Good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I was going to, I was kind of shocked at the graph too, and I was hoping that maybe all those red dots reflected 100 years of history, but in fact, that's a shot of 5 years. So certainly we do have a concentration in the south part of the city. So now you speak of recommending that we do much more education, and I know the fire service is always into education any way they can. We used to see demonstrations at the Home and Trade Show and occasions like that, but I know COVID kind of put the cramp in a lot of those things. What do you have going forward, Chief, that you are going to do education-wise to bring us all back up to speed on this?
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McDonald. So any opportunity that we have to be out in the public, we're making those attempts. Last year, we spent time at Canadian Tire and Home Depot and many of those locations during different prevention weeks or just awareness weeks to be out. Any opportunity that we have where we're invited to go and speak, we take those opportunities as well. And I guess, you know, certainly COVID had its strain, but what the team is discussing is what can we do over and above that. It's one thing to go to these events and hand out our nice red hats and the coloring books, but when I look at that, we're not making an impact. And those are the conversations we're having now, is to what is the impact that we need to have. It's not necessarily handing out the goodies, so to speak. It's providing the necessities of awareness to really hit home. And these are in my opinion, this is something that we need to revamp 150 degrees, because what I'm seeing there in that capture zone, we need to do better, and we need to look at targeting that in a completely different way. And that's, to answer your question,
Right.
I don't have the answer. We're still
I'm sure you've got
looking
some
at that.
great brains working on it, so I have
There's a couple.
confidence in you.
There's a couple.
Councillor Good.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I do have a few questions, some of which kind of plays off of what Councillor McDonald was alluding to about public education. I see in there that additional fire prevention and education staff are required, but these don't necessarily need to come from the fire department. Do we have plans to engage with either other outside agencies or other departments within the city to engage in that type of education? And do we have plans to go into schools to engage with some of our young people?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Good. So we do all the schools, and we do complete fire drills, and we do that on a yearly basis. I think what we're talking about there is our suppressions or our prevention staff are a staff of 3. We've got a staff of 14 in addition to that, at a full complement, staff of 10 as a minimum complement that are also on duty. And some of the strategy is looking at how can we include our suppression staff in on some of that prevention, public ed, and completing that as numbers, as opposed to a division of 3 that is your only job and you will go and do everything for everybody. It's not possible.
Absolutely, and versatility is valuable. I see in the report, it says, including partnering with other community departments. And so that's kind of my question.
And
Are we going to be engaging with other community departments in order to facilitate that kind of education?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor, and to Councillor McIntosh's point, you know, part of us joining forces with bylaw enforcement, housing, and collaboratively working, you know, as a city, as a whole, as opposed to siloing and everybody trying to do their own thing. We're looking at as a group, looking at this situation.
Wonderful. My next question just has to do with, it's a long report, there's a lot in there, but looking at the flow charts where you look at the as-is and the to-be, I'm seeing RMS versus be on. I'm assuming this is just a change in software. Is that correct? And is that something that you see will be bringing better efficiency to the way that we, is it just to track our data more effectively, or what is the purpose behind making that switch?
Certainly, through you, Mayor Towndale, to Councillor Good. So as John indicated, so RMS meaning Record Management System. Currently, we're using a software called ICO. ICO, I will suggest, over promised and under provided, and we are unfortunately trying to work and get out of that system. Council will be aware on this 2023 budget, we do have budget proposed for a new RMS system, and in collaboration with John and working through with other colleagues across the province on trying to find that product that's going to do, as John indicated, provide us the data and capture the information that we need.
Thank you. Just one last tiny little thing. While I appreciate that the location of the proposed station has already been discussed at length, it's so hard to look at a graph like that and think that it's in the right place. When you look at the density of structure fires that are happening really right between the two existing stations, while I appreciate that suppression is not necessarily the primary goal and prevention is kind of the new way, do you see there being limitations to prevention and with engaging in those communities if the proposed station is so far from the communities that are being most affected by the structure fires?
Through Mayor Towndale to Councillor Good, I guess I would suggest that when we build a fire hall, it's a 50-year building. So that building will be in existence for the next 50 years in the city. And what this city will look like in 20, 30, 40 years from now, I think that we won't see what we see, to John's point, of the number of fires will be going down. And we won't need to focus that fire station in the heart of something that's no longer there. And now we have a building we're investing multi-millions of dollars into for the next 50 years, and the need no longer exists. So I would suggest to you that where this proposed station is in the next number of years will come more clarity that was the right location.
Okay, thank you for your responses.
Certainly. John will just offer us a little.
Thanks, Mayor Towndale, to Councillor Good. There's jeopardy in, as the chief said, there's jeopardy in placing of resources based on what's happening now. So from a strategic point of view, the strategy is to reduce fires, plans within that strategy. As that's being done, and as you're looking at the next 30 to 40 years, you don't know whether the concentration of fires will actually shift north as changes get made in the area that the fires currently concentrated in. So I'd be really cautious about rethinking your proposed station, considering the strategy that's going to be put into place by the chief over the next little while.
Okay,
I'm not saying don't, I'm just saying I'd be really cautious about making any changes.
thank you.
Mr. Willow?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to comment a little bit because I think Chief Stevenson was either in the early days or was not here when this location study was done. And I certainly don't want to say that I played a big part, but I did meet with them from a planning perspective And I do want to make a couple of comments. One is, I think you need to place all the calls on this map as opposed to just the fire calls, because there are several calls that are happening throughout the community, of course, that are not identified here. These are, of course, the worst case scenarios, but I think there are calls that are necessary in all parts of the city. There's been a lot of criticism in the past, and that's why not just this study, but a previous study talked about the northwest section of the city. So if you're only going to have 2 stations, certainly you wouldn't concentrate the 2 stations in the center and east and not pay attention to where development is going to continue to occur, and that is in the east also, but also, you know, Riverdale continuing to grow, the north in Amherst Corners, Mercier, all of those areas will continue to grow. And so I think we need to map all calls. We need to look at where is the future development going to occur, residential development. And the other thing that we're not mapping here is the business park, which will continue to grow and is easily accessed from the location that's shown, and that is directly down Tollgate Road into the business park. So I'm just pointing out that there are some factors that we're not seeing on this map.
Further questions from council? Okay. All in favor of receiving the report? Carried, thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, before our guests leave the presenters table, perhaps we can deal with the report. And the actions recommended are as follows: that council receive this report regarding the community risk assessment, that council adopt the community risk assessment document prepared by Pomax Consulting, that council adopt the preferred treatment options outlined in this report for inclusion in the development of a revised establishing and regulating bylaw for the Cornwall Fire Service, and finally, that council approve this report to form part of the revised master plan proposed for 2023.
Moved by Councillor Hollingsworth, seconded Councillor Dupel. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried, thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, Mr. Mayor, is a delegation by Rachel's Kids, and we would ask anyone presenting to come to the presenters table.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'll leave it to you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rachel Navaneelan, the founder of Rachel's Kids. I'm here today because we have a very exciting project which will benefit the most vulnerable members of our community, differently abled children and children in general. This has been a long-term project that has been very passionate for myself. COVID got in the way, but now we're up and coming to try and get this project going. I also would like to add that my family and I will be a major donor towards this project. I'm going to get Sharon Miller, our secretary, to make a quick introduction of this project, and then Jackie Standing will make a detailed presentation.
Thank you very much. As Rachel said, we are very excited about this project. It has been something that we've talked about, and we feel that there is a definite need. Experiences told us when we had the House of Hope on Boundary Road, there was a lot of families that went through there that said, we're just so thankful for the opportunity to get together with other families, with children, with different abilities. And unfortunately, during COVID, you know, we shut down the House of Hope. There was overhead involved and something that we couldn't manage as a charity. But we made the best of that situation. We dispersed our specialized equipment to many of the schools in the area. They're using that equipment now. Many, many kids are benefiting, and they're benefiting all day during the school day. So we feel thankful about that opportunity, but we still see that there's a need. People want to get together, they want to play, they want to talk to other families who are having similar challenges, maybe with some of their family members, and they want access to this all the time. They want it to be free access, they want to be able to go to a park, they want somewhere where their children can have the opportunities that other children are having, and there just aren't a lot of programs available for differently abled children. So this is our way of addressing, like Rachel said, the very vulnerable sector in our community. And we hope that everybody will get on board with us, and that we have a very successful fundraising initiative that Jackie's going to talk about all the benefits of this type of park for the city, and it'll be a real feather in the city's cap to have such a thing in our area.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for your time this evening. My name is Jacqueline Standing, and I am the chairperson for Rachel's Kids Park of Hope. I was asked to do this exciting project with them because I was a special needs mom, and I did design, build, and fundraise for a all universally inclusive park in Lorneal, Ontario. During that project, I learned the United Nations considers play a fundamental right of every child, no matter their ability. I also found that studies show children are having the most fun when having interactions with their peers. Unfortunately, the park isn't always a place where they're going to have an opportunity to do that. A lot of kids end up having to sit on the sidelines. Playgrounds like this look appealing and seem accessible, but often the equipment is only partially accessible. And there's not a lot of room on those types of structures to allow children to actually interact together. They are not barrier-free, nor are they inclusive. With your help, this is the kind of park we want to build. Poured-in-place rubbered surfacing is very critical. It allows wheelchairs and walkers alike to be able to glide over the surface, and it's still very forgiving if the child has a tumble. A cozy dome to allow children, when they're overstimulated, to have a chance to have a timeout. I could actually use one in my office. An open, barrier-free design that allows, with as few ramps as possible, that allows for optimal inclusion and creative play. A sway fun, which is a boat-like item which is wheelchair accessible, and all the children can play on it together using the momentum of their own bodies. It's incredibly inclusive. High back spinners that allow for children to be able to sit even if they have low tone. Slides built into hills that allow for better accessibility, and also the metal rollers allow for children with cochlear implants to be able to play on them as well. Swings that encourage parent and child bonding. Swings that have higher backs and over-the-shoulder restraints to allow anyone to be able to use them. Sensory panels and interactive playstations with musical harmonic elements benefit everyone, but particularly those on the spectrum of autism and with low visual. Communication panels featuring Braille, sign language, and pictures of activities to help children that are nonverbal be able to actually communicate. Elevated sand tables and diggers that allow everyone to participate in the fun. The result of these kinds of parks is pure joy. We respectfully ask Council to identify a portion of St. Therese's Park to be called Rachel's Kids Playground of Hope. That we be allowed to 100% fund, design, and source all playground equipment. That we be allowed to oversee the installation and site preparation with the City Works Department and assistance for the site. And lastly, that Rachel's Kids be allowed to donate all of the equipment back to the City of Cornwall. I thank you for your time, and we welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Miller, Ms. Standing, Dr. Navanilan. Before we go to questions, The recommendation is to refer this to administration for report. Can I get a motion on the table? Councillor Hollingsworth, Councillor Dupel. Now I'll move to questions from council. Councillor Hebert.
Not a question. I gotta bring this forward, I've been told. But really, through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you, Dr. Nevan-Elan, for such a generous donation for something incredibly needed in our community. And when I see this, and I'm looking at these photos, this is a park that really any child can enjoy, and I think anything developed going forward, be it infrastructure, parks, anything, should be developed with a lens of like excessive inclusivity, because building a ramp doesn't mean someone who's not on a wheelchair can't use a ramp, right? Every child can use this, everyone can use a ramp, so why not go all the way? And this is just a really great example of this. So happy to support this today, but also when recommendations come back from administration, but thank you for bringing this forward to us this evening.
Councillor Dupel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for your generosity, Dr. Nevan-Elan, and the hard work of Rachel's Kids Committee. I think this is fantastic news for the city. I will certainly support when recommendations come back from administration. I know that I work every day trying to, take down barriers of people who have different abilities, and it's something that I'm passionate about, and I'd love to sit on your fundraising committee initiative. So when you're ready for fundraising, I'd be happy to join.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dr. Nevan-Elan, you're always stepping up to the plate. Anytime there's something to do with children, you're there. And it's really nice to have you here, you and your people, instead of, and back there too. Oh, there you go. I have to say this. I'm happy to see you here instead of looking down my throat. That's usually where I see you, but like, you're better looking than looking upward.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you for all you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Councillor McIntosh.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Morris and some of the others have said. Morris knows the field, and Morris says it's a great project. I'm going to agree with him on that one. How could you not be against something like this? Only question is, why St. Therese Park?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McIntosh. The reason being is it's actually on a bus route. It's very central in the city and had enough land for us to be able to use it. Also, it has the splash pad there, which is a great inclusive element.
And washrooms.
Washrooms, that's right. Huge.
Well, as they say in showbiz, break a leg.
Councillor Good.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. This presentation made me emotional. It's so incredible, and it's something that I think some of you know I've been advocating for. Inclusive playgrounds and inclusive players are so essential to, I'm crying. It's so beautiful. We cannot do this on our own. We really need your engagement with this type of project. So I'm so pleased to see this coming forward. The elements that are here, I was writing them down. I'm looking at them. The communication board, it's so important. The musical instruments, seeing the little backhoe that is accessible that somebody can just wheel up to. I'm so fortunate I have young kids and they don't have any accessibility barriers. But even having a young kid in a stroller and trying to push it around a park is so hard to do that when my little guy was like 6 months old and I'm lugging him around in my arms, I was like, this is awful. I cannot imagine being in a wheelchair myself and having to get around. It was a real eye-opener for me, so I am absolutely beyond thrilled. I apologize, I didn't expect to feel this way, but I do. And thank you so much. I fully, wholeheartedly support this, and I would be happy to help fundraise as well, so good job.
Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's nothing left to say, except, again, it needs to be said often. Thank you so much for this. You're so generous, and you've always been so thoughtful of the needs of the children in our community, and we appreciate that tremendously. And I think maybe the greatest aspect of this is the the fact that you will break down social isolation, because kids with special needs inevitably, when they're served specifically for their needs, it has to be somewhere other than where everybody else is playing. And so this is the kind of interactive community that you're allowing to take place here that's so great. And that park has great shade too.
It's a great park.
Council-
It's made the factor too. It's a fenced area, it's a traffic
Yeah.
area,
Yeah,
but accessible.
for
I
sure.
want to give Jackie the credit, she has been scouring the city for the right location, and she has given a lot of thought and consideration to this, and we're.
Well, you
so
make a
behind
great
it.
team, the three of you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. You know, there's been an effort over the last several years when building parks to make sure there's a piece or two or three that are there for kids with different abilities. But what really got my attention in looking at your report the other evening was the picture of the young children looking on. Like there's a ramp there, but they can't access the whole park. So it's almost saying, here's something for you while all the kids play over here. But what I liked about your park was, what I'm seeing is, it doesn't matter what your abilities are, you can come play at this park. And that, I think, is the right way to do all the inclusion. Not having you come join our park to use one or two pieces, but use the whole park. And it's gotta be, it would feel, I would think, amazing as a young child to be able to play with all different kids with all different abilities all in the same place. So, you know, the last picture of the child in that little swing with their eyes like with a smile. I mean, that picture alone would have sold me on the project. But I think this is the right way to go for parks moving forward, and I'll support this 100% for sure.
Thank you so much.
Further questions or comments from council? Thank you again for your presentation this evening. When we met previously, I told you that you had my full support, and that continues today, and I look forward to partnering with yourselves and your organization on this. I think this is an exciting opportunity for the community and an inclusive opportunity. It's a win-win for everybody, so thank you again.
Thank you.
Motion to refer this to administration for a report. All in favor? Carried, thank you. Thank you. Clerk?
We will address tender 23 TO4 Cornwall Arts and Culture Center construction. The recommendation is this tender be awarded to 152610 Canada Incorporated, operating as Lorrain and Company from Nepean, at the total bid price of $10,389,999.70.
Motion, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Bennett, discussion. Councillor McDonald.
If I may. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I urge my colleagues to support this tender. It's been a long time coming, but before I speak more to it, I'd like to mention a couple of points that are in the report that Mr. Fothrop prepared. And one of them, of course, is always there, is the 1.3 million that the community has raised under the brilliant leadership of Ms. Burke, who sits here in the front row, the leader of the Be the Link committee, ably assisted by former Mayor of Cornwall, Brian Lynch, who happens to be her husband as well, and best company. And I must also mention Rose Denway, because the collective was mentioned in the report, and Rose is the chair of the collective and has been since it began in 2013, more often than not. She's always there to shoulder that responsibility. And then I also have to mention Andre, since he's right here in the front row. And when Katie called that first meeting, when we were trying to decide how much money we would dare hope to raise, Andre just cut the conversation short. He said, "Go for $1 million." and we all, okay. Like it was gonna happen, and sure enough, it's happened, and we're still counting. So, and so many members of the Hall of Fame too in the company. I see Peter Leclerc here in the front row. So welcome all of you, and thank you for your support of this wonderful, wonderful, I guess, what can I call it, development in our city. So I want to give you reasons why you should support this and why you should support it now. I know we're in budget, and everybody gets nervous. I mean, this is a $10 million possibility, and we know the millions we're looking at, but I have to tell you, this is actually a money-making venture. Trust me. Study after study has shown that sports activities bring in so much money to a city's bottom dollar, but art tourism actually brings in more. We haven't experienced that yet here in Cornwall, but we did have a taste of it last council meeting when we heard about the money that the Klein House Gallery had made. There are so many possibilities out there, and there are specific reasons why we have to support this. This art center will complete the remaking of Cornwall, this formal mill town, and we started that remaking in 2006 after we hit our lowest point when our last industry said they were pulling out and we didn't know what we were going to do. And at that point, I remember Paul Fitzpatrick being interviewed in the paper, and he said it like it was simple. He said, "We'll diversify." And we did. We have been on a steady upward trajectory since 2006. Now, that's because of the support of council behind the wonderful ideas that our Economic Development Department and all the city administration has constantly created for us and put out there for us. And of course, the community, which always rallies around a good idea. This art center, it will give a home to the arts. It will be the missing link in our claim to be a full amenities, full service community. And the Arts Center will contribute immeasurably to our economic vitality. It'll support and it will create a creative economy, and it will anchor a revived downtown. And let's not kid ourselves, our downtown is just a small pocket in a very small city, so it's going to benefit everybody. This is going to breathe a whole new life, especially in terms of tourism, into our city. So we absolutely have to support this. And back to the sports and the arts thing, you know, I think in this context of the city of Stratford and the city of Niagara on the Lake, and for the life of me, I can't think of a city that was created by sports. So there you have it, folks. I know we're in budget, but let's be bold, let's have faith. This is good for our community, and my gosh, we've worked for it for so long, so we have to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Further comments from council? Councillor Gardner and Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Really, all I can say is, you're right. I've been involved with this since day one. The very first meeting we had about an arts, I wanted to find out if the menu was here, if people had the appetite to have an arts center. And we put out 25 chairs at the Benson Center the first time. The second meeting, a month later, I had to call upstairs to one of our workers and say, I need more chairs, because the place filled up. Because what I had done in the first place was to ask people to work in the arts industry under an umbrella, all having their own autonomy. And it took off from there. And Brian and Katie, thank you for all the work you've put in. Without you guys, I don't know if we'd have made it. The last comment I have to say is, I remember saying to everybody that was there in those meetings, it's going to take a long time, but we'll get there. We're here now. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. I could have a couple of questions to Ms. Bailey and perhaps a comment. So let's make sure we're clear. Ms. Bailey, we're looking at $10.4 million for the Arts Center as it stands with this tender, correct?
That's including the HST, of which some of it is recoverable.
Okay. On top of that, based on page 110, for those of you who have paper reports, there's a $1.5 to $2 million retrofit on that building that we don't know for sure, but that's a ballpark, correct?
Mr. Mayor, I'll probably get that question.
Theatrical systems, I believe, is the report?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that is a estimated cost for the theater fit-up.
So that's $12.4 million, correct? Give or take? And change? And we're gonna finance that at current rates around 6%. Now, I realize the financing doesn't take place till typically about 12 months from now, is that right? So that 6% could go up, could go down, we don't really know.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't plan to start borrowing until 2025.
So conceivably, we don't really know where that number is going to be. No idea.
Not at this time, but we'll probably budget at about 5.
5? Okay. So 5%, and that's typically over 10 years, right?
For a facility such as the Arts Center, it would be over 25 years.
25 years.
Much like the Benson Center.
Okay. Now, if I got the numbers right, $6 million that we've financed, that we've put in, that we've allocated for financing for this project, plus about $1 million in fundraising, so we're looking at about 7, and there was another $250,000 for some naming rights, so $7.2 million, correct?
I'm not sure exactly where you're getting the 7.2
Okay,
million.
well,
but-
there's $6 million we've put in the bank, or we've allocated for financing,
Okay,
right?
based on the approved budget of
Of a
council.
couple of years back.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so there's 9.76 thousand on page 110, right? A potential 380,000, so around 400,000 to boot. And then there's another 250 in that same paragraph that you said, what is it? Administration secured naming rights agreement. So that's over and above the money that you've thrown in there?
I think based on the third quarter report to council for capital, our budget at that time was just under 7 million.
7 million. Okay, that makes it easier for,
Is that correct, Jamie?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the latest estimate that was brought to council in 2021 was 7.4 million.
7 point.
Was the construction value.
So here's the thing, Your Worship. The project, as it stands right now, is 12.4, 5% financing over 25 years. You're probably tagging on another maybe $4 to $6 million over that term. I'm not going to worry too much about that, but it's part of the big picture. We're looking at $5 million shortfall. Do we know where we're getting that money from? So we have a $12 million project. We have a little over $7 million in financing and fundraising. That's around $5 million, and change. Do we know where we're getting that $5 million?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the recommendation would be to finance the amount for this tender and then the tender for the theatrical system.
So the whole project, less the $1 million in fundraising, we're going to finance.
Just under 1.4 million in donations.
And the last thing, just before I make a comment, Your Worship, have we built in, typically speaking, Mr. Fawthrop, correct me if I'm wrong, but we typically build in about a 20% contingency on any project. Is that contingency part of the budget?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is no contingency in the price in the award.
Okay, now,
Not including contingency.
you guys have done more construction projects than I do. Correct me if I'm wrong. Typically, there's some kind of a contingency, correct? Almost never in my 30-odd years of kicking around here have I seen something come in perfectly on budget, right to the dollar.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we typically, you do typically encounter extra costs throughout the nature of a construction project. However, the contingency, any kind of contingency value is not typically added into the price of the tender award. However, if in a retrofit building like this, then I would expect there will be some extra work, I'm sure, required, which would be typical.
Now, it seems to me years ago, Your Worship, it was 20%, but we can debate, it doesn't really matter. Here's my point. We currently have a project that we funded to the tune of about $7 million that's currently coming in at $12 million, plus or minus 10 to 20%. That's the nature of construction, it just is, plus financing. That's an awful lot of money, Your Worship, and because it's so much money, I'm not going to support this. I think it's too much money, regardless of the time of year or what time it is. I mean, the municipality is taking a pounding, but that's neither here nor there. My colleague across the table has talked about debt and the fight against debt at great length, and fair enough, that's not an unreasonable proposition. And because we're looking at really a significant chunk of debt for what is essentially a little theater with some meeting rooms, I don't want to spend the money. I think it's too much money, and I'm not going to support the tender. Thank you.
Councillor Good and Councillor Hebert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I'm going to make a somewhat impassioned speech and I might cry again, so I apologize. I come from a family rich with artists. I have been engaged in the arts in one fashion or another since I was young, and I value the arts and what it brings to our community and what it brings to our young people. I have family and friends here, and I want to say that I wholeheartedly support the creation of an arts and culture center in our community. And as I say that and I hear the budget, it is a big sum of money, and I recognize that. And the sum of money is not something necessarily that deters me, because I do believe that this is an investment that our community deserves. And while I say that, I'm going to throw a little curveball, because I can't help myself. We find ourselves right now at a unique moment in history, a moment in which reconciliation is at the forefront of our discussions at nearly every moment. When I look at the initial plans, the 2016 survey that came out, which recommended that our Arts and Culture Center be placed at the Civic Complex, it included an array of different services and facilities that would serve all sectors of the art community. I love that. Holy cow, do I ever love that. I'm happy to have this project, and I would be happy to support it as is, but I think there is an opportunity here. While we have a partnership with Akwesasne, our neighbors to the south in the Portlands, we have the opportunity to at least explore the engagement of a partnership and develop a true arts and culture center that will give us all of the aspects we are looking for. In the spirit of reconciliation, we can get more doing a brand new build than we can trying to modify this existing building. That is, any contractor will tell you that. That is fact. I believe that although this center offers us more than we have right now, we're looking at an investment in a center that ought to last us 50 plus years. This is something that our community, our children, our children's children should use. And I say this, and I know it has been a long time coming. In 2006, I was 18 years old, and I wasn't really in a position to be engaged in this discussion at the time. And in 2016, when the original report came out, the Portlands had just been divested from the federal government, and we did not really have the opportunity to consider that as an option. Next week, there will be a meeting between myself and potentially other members of council with the Grand Chief to discuss the possibility of engaging Akwesasne in an arts and culture center that would celebrate Indigenous arts and culture, which would also provide the spaces that we are hoping for in this very proposal. So what I am saying, what I am proposing simply is that we take a moment to assess the potential. Can we create an arts and culture center with meaningful reconciliation with our partners in Akwesasne that will provide a space to tick off all of the boxes, that will not leave us saying, well, we could have done better and we could have done more. 50 years is a long time. I want this for our community. I don't want it to delay it. And 2025 is not tomorrow. So even if we approve this budget today, it doesn't mean we break ground next week. I want this center to be something that is fully accessible, that every person comes into the front door and experiences the same feeling as everyone else who enters that space. I believe we do not have a choice in that. I'm not sure if that technicality has been worked out. I know during discussions there were talks of having an accessible entrance through the back, and while that, you know, kind of works, I don't consider that inclusive personally. I have a lot of notes here and I've really gone off topic with myself, so I'm gonna just try and bring it back. Call to action number 83 from the Truth and Reconciliation speaks to a strategy for Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists to undertake collaborative projects and produce work that contribute to the reconciliation process. I believe we have an opportunity that we are presented with that is worthy of exploration, and I think that we ought to at least allow ourselves the opportunity to see the potential, to explore it, and if it's not there, then let's go with this. So I would like to make a motion to defer this decision until our next meeting of the council.
Motion to defer is in order. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hollingsworth. We are now debating the motion to defer. Councillor Hollingsworth.
I think, Your Worship, quite frankly, I support the motion because this is not a, regardless of whether you're a fan or not a fan or whatever the case may be, if we're gonna spend 12, 14 million bucks, let's try to flush it out to the best of our ability in an attempt to get the most for the most. So, while I'm not sure how it'll shake itself out, I think it's imperative upon the City of Cornwall to explore every possible avenue. In light of the kind of money we're spending, it would be quite frankly, quietly almost negligent to not at least investigate it, especially when we're talking about a week or two to discuss some possibilities with our neighbors. So that's why I'm going to support the motion.
Councillor McIntosh.
I didn't grow up in a family rich in the arts. My mother, I grew up in a single parent family. My mother had 2 jobs, helped put us through school. But I have a deep appreciation for the arts regardless, which I've learned over the years. The numbers, it shocked me, surprised me. Anybody can sit in this room and say, oh, it's only 12 million. It's not just 12 million. It's a lot of money, a lot of money. What did it cost? What was the investment we made in the Benson Center? What the same, eh?
32.
Our personal investment?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. In
16.
So it's a 10-year-old facility that was built for $32 million.
Yeah, but we didn't pay 32.
No, it's a $32 million facility. Just like this.
I'm going to try to phrase this. How much money did it cost the taxpayers of Cornwall for the Benson Center?
1/3 of that.
1/3.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, 1/3.
1/3.
11, $12 million.
Help us out.
Put a number to it.
I'm a history major, I'm not in math.
I would suggest that.
Anyway,
probably
forget.
$50 million today.
We, Mark, you're confusing me here. No, okay, this is about the same amount we built a beautiful big building for, that taxpayers had to put in. I guess what I'm trying to say is, how did it get to this? I mean, this is a building, we're not building a new building. This is gonna come in about the same as a new fire station. At least that's what we were told. I don't believe that number, but anyway, we were told around 10 to 12. Why would a renovated building go to this kind of, I mean, this is a big figure for a renovated building. Somebody in the administration can answer. Mark?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm sure Mr. Fothrop has more information to provide as well, but we're really getting a new building. What we're realizing as well is a beautiful facade that is being retained, that we're able to work with, but we're really getting a new building. On the subject of accessibility, I believe Mr. Fothrop can speak to that, but I believe it's a fully accessible building in its newly designed situation. And so you would enter it from Pitt Street, fully accessible. The elevation has been changed, and that is partly why the building has changed so much. It's really a contemporary building with a very historic facade.
Yeah.
I also just very quickly want to make a couple of comments. The location was felt to be really important because it's a catalyst to our downtown. None of the other locations, whether the complex, the cotton mills, are a catalyst to our downtown. And so therefore, think about the impact that it has on the restaurants and the retail and all of the vibrancy of our downtown. The harbor location is, we've not had this conversation, but certainly the harbor location is a co-ownership. It doesn't belong just to the city of Cornwall, and so that's a conversation that needs to be had. But of course, the first thing that we need to do with that property is deal with the environmental matters. And so I think while if council goes in that direction, I'd be happy to participate in that conversation. But it absolutely delays this project by a fairly significant amount. I know the arts community, no one sees me as an arts person in this community. I'm very involved in sports. But I think, you know, truly I feel that we have done everything we needed to with sports. I think this is the effort in arts. And I think delaying it is unfortunate, would be unfortunate. But
Having said all that, I appreciate that. What you're saying is that, but I'm going back to, I supported this. I support it by giving a few dollars off my paycheck each week. I've been doing that and I'll do it for another 4 years. I'm glad to do that. My little piece of, my little contribution. But I'm going back to the figure. I got 2 calls already tonight. Yeah, 2 calls, that's in a city this size, isn't gonna sway me. But the concern was, why so much money? Didn't have an answer. Told him to call Jamie, but didn't want to. Well, that's what the Integrity Commission told us to do. Anyway, so I want, you know, I gotta say, I'm challenged by this large number, and you borrow, like Dean says, you borrow the money, you pay interest on it. Now Sarah brings up the bit about possible Aquasasti getting involved. I don't know why we didn't think of that before, but so, you know, it's another thing in the mix, and as Mark alluded to, delaying it doesn't jeopardize it, but a cloud hangs over it. The figure scares me, okay? I'm going to be very upfront with that. Do I want to say, nah, this is game over? No, I don't want to say that either. But it's a figure, and I'll answer to the people that are going to call me up and say you're an idiot and everything else, and that's been proven. But I'm really nervous about this figure, okay? We've made the commitment. I appreciate everything Dean said. We've talked about this sitting beside each other, but I'm reluctantly ready to go ahead with this, okay? Don't like the idea. The number's too big. My figure shows that we're gonna have to borrow around $40 million in the next 18 months to cover things that we're juggling. Tracy may dispute that, but I'm talking fire station, meters, this, communication systems, the whole thing. So anyway, that's what I'm saying. I was surprised with the number. I really was, and why it kept building and building and building. And I hope all these folks live in Cornwall and pay taxes to Cornwall and give me their phone numbers. Because when I get my calls, my cynical friends, I'll just say, I'll pass it on. You can deal with these people too. Although it's my responsibility and my job to make decisions. That. Having said that, that's it.
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, first of all, I give a lot of credit to Jamie and the people here on getting this project to where it is. I didn't play much of a role, but I have had a lot of conversations with Jamie about this project and how can we get to a number that works. I'll be honest with you, and I think Jamie would agree, to get it under $10 million was surprising to us.
Really?
The price of products, material, labor, everything that is post-COVID is coming in exactly like this. And so this number was not surprising to us. In fact, again, to get it under 10 million was an achievement.
Can I continue, Mr. Mayor? I appreciate that, Mark, and I appreciate the fact that sports has been taken care of, and it certainly has in this town. Sports facilities are A1, and in the past when I've defended this, I've always said, what does it cost us to operate the Benson Center? What does it cost us to Aquatic Center? What does it cost to operate the Civic Center? Would I be off by saying $4 million a year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, of course, we don't have that number here this evening.
But we used to get those numbers, and
I would suggest that you're probably not.
I'm not far off, Emily. No, of course not. So anyway, that's to operate. I know those are multi-sports facilities and multitude of, everybody from the bridge club to soccer players, tennis players use them, but I can recall in my past life writing making comments about this in my columns, and how various councils said, well, we take care of sports, now it's going to be the arts people. We're going to take care of them. That's been going on for like 15, 16 years. And maybe we had done this 16 years ago. We'd be looking at a small figure, but we went ahead with it. Anyway, that's what I've got to say on that.
Councillor Huber, I had you on my previous speaking list, so I'll let you go next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not too concerned about the cost if we wait another year, 2 years, 3 years. Mr. Boileau mentioned cost of everything's rising. Of course, it's not 7,000. It's going to be 10,000, and in 2 years, it's going to be 13,000. And so we need, or million. What am I saying? Thousand. Sorry, wishful thinking. Million. Pardon my language. But yes, we delay this anymore. It's going to be continuously increasing year after year after year. So we gotta bite the bullet. We gotta go now. A couple of questions about the deferral. Now, it was suggested that it would take one council meeting to come back with information on if the feasibility of relocating this plan. I beg to, I'm not quite sure that that's feasible. Approximately how long would it take to come back to council with a detailed plan on the feasibility of changing the location, considering that a meeting of the Harborland Corporation would likely need to be called, and there's only one meeting in March, which is probably jam-packed already.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to give you a general answer, but I'll ask Mr. Michael Fothrop to comment a bit more on the environment. But so the harbor is in the midst of environmental review, and it's going to take some time for all of the facts to be laid out, and then it will help us to determine where we can develop on that property. But that's going to take a bit of time, and of course, the work required to make that site a proper location is going to take some time. But I'm going to ask Mr. Michael Fothrop to comment on the environmental work that's happening.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, yeah, the Harborlands have retained a consultant to complete a record of site condition. That's a 2-year process I would say at a minimum. They're often quite challenging and take a lot of time to get through. Associated with that, there's going to need to be a planning exercise, which we have talked about at the Harbor Committee meetings. I guess further to Mr. Boileau's comments, there's going to need to be on-site remediation. There's going to need to be a fair amount of decisions as to what can be developed on the property relative to the environmental conditions. So I guess to Mr. Boileau's comments, development at the property is a long time away. There's a number of things that need to be completed, and it's many years.
So my question, I guess that was a follow-up question. My initial question is, how long would it take administration to come back to council and say, yeah, it's possible to develop on the harbor land in the 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, whatever, but is it a month? Is it 6 months? Is it a year before admin can come back and say, we could do this? Or no, we go with the Pitt Street location?
Matter of clarification, if possible. The request is to defer, to decide if council wants to ask administration to prepare a report on this. As well, in terms of the environmental assessment, it was my understanding that for that to be completed, we need to have an understanding of what that site is to be used for in order for them to complete that assessment. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's correct.
Do we have an answer for Councillor Hubert's question about when we would get the report back, when the deferral would return to council? 'Cause
Give or
I think that's
take.
what she's asking.
Michael, you may be able to answer that better than I.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we could bring a report back relatively quickly. The trouble is going to be is not knowing the environmental conditions at this time, right? And how much of the property is developable. It's honestly that we wouldn't be able to give a definitive answer for a prolonged period of time until the consultant came back and said, you could do this on this property.
I believe.
I see a couple of hands over there. So Mr. Jamie Fothrop and Ms. Bailey.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think also just because we kind of went through a little bit of this exercise when we moved sites from the Civic Complex site to the Bank of Montreal site, we did a fit test study that would determine, you know, what a center could potentially look like on that at a new location. I would say that I don't imagine that we would be able to get that done in time for a March 27th council meeting. The other thing I think worth mentioning as well is with this tender, due to the volatility of the construction market and construction costs, normally contractors are required to hold a price with us for 90 days. Unfortunately, that is not the case here. Contractors on big projects like this recently have been asking for that 90-day period to be shortened to 30 days, purely because, you know, all their sub-trades and suppliers need to hold those prices, and with the price of steel and fuel, holding it for 90 days is problematic for them. And so this price that we have here is good for 30 days.
So my next question, if I may, Mr. Mayor, was specifically about the tender. So good to know that they can hold the price for 30 days. But if we decide in a month's time, or you know, we decide we're just not going to go ahead with this and we're going to wait a few years, can we get in trouble?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we shouldn't get into trouble if council does not proceed with the work as described. The city could go out with a subsequent tender very different from this tender. But I would suggest that from the conversations that I'm hearing, that's a year or so down the road.
Okay. And then build would be, I don't know, 5-6 years down the road. I don't know if we have any guesstimates at this time. No, we don't want to make any public guesstimates either. No? Okay. I'm also wondering if, and I don't think administration can answer this, but we have had a lot of folks in our community make significant donations to the Art Center in the concept as it is now. I'm wondering if that would jeopardize any of the donations if we decide, oh, we're gonna take your money that we intended to do this with and we're gonna do something else with it. So I think that's, the public can't really answer at a council meeting, but that's just something that's come to mind. So I'm not really sure.
The thing I would add to that is it certainly wouldn't be called the Bank of Montreal
This is true. Yeah, so that would be a loss. So Yeah, so I mean, I don't hate the idea because I do believe that it is in our best interest as a community, not as a council, to do something significant when it comes to reconciliation, specifically on the waterfront. We have this really beautiful opportunity here, this amazing partnership with Akwesasne, the co-ownership of land. This is so unique. And so I think reconciliation will be the theme of whatever ends up on that waterfront, with community input and consultation, which will be extensive over the next several years. But I do know how long these guys have been waiting for this. I may not have been around in 2006, but I did attend a meeting upstairs at the complex at the front. That was early days, and there was tons of folks there, and the excitement was it was contagious, and it's been a long time coming, and so I think I would support moving ahead with the proposed plan, because there has been millions of dollars spent to date, I'm certain. I don't know what the dollars are exactly, in developing a plan of the complex and then changing that plan and creating a new plan, and all of the work that's already been put into place, and all of those city resources, financial and human resource and all of that. So I don't hate the idea, Councillor Good. I think that the intention is really lovely, but I think we can still do something beautiful in the spirit of reconciliation, and still do this art center downtown that will bring so much vibrancy to our community.
Mr. Bolo?
Yeah, just a quick comment, and it's not my comment, it'll be Jamie's comment, but Jamie was involved in the location study, and I believe the Cotton Mills was visited by the site selection people, and I'm not sure if there's anything that you wanted to provide. Of course, they were looking at the existing Cotton Mills building, so it's not exactly the same. So I'm not sure if there's anything you wanted to add there.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, from what I recall, two of the most, when we did public consultation as part of that feasibility study that ultimately recommended the Civic Complex site. The two most important factors that the public communicated to us that was most important to them in the site selection was proximity to downtown and proximity to the waterfront. And so that was why the Civic Complex site scored highest. The Cotton Mill site was considered, as was a number of sites. St. Lawrence College as well was a consideration. The former Cy Miller site as well was another consideration.
So if one last comment, I promise. And on the cost issue, a little birdie told me today that there are more donations in the queue once there is movement, actual movement on this. So I think there's been nearly 1.4 million raised, but we can anticipate significant contributions coming in from our community and foundations and whatnot. I'm sure there's still time to find other funding opportunities beyond the financing. So I think that's something we've seen our community do amazing fundraising so far, and I'm sure there's so much more to come. Now I'm done.
I'm going to return to my speakers list. Councillor Sabri, then Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regards to Councillor Good's motion, my question is this seems to have come up. I've heard all kinds of potential ideas for down at the harbor front. So just how committed might this be?
Through the chair, Councillor Sabri.
I apologize. Through the chair. Councillor Good.
To myself. To answer your question, how committed, I don't know how committed. Frankly, this was an opportunity that came up through discussions following our last meeting and actually after our initial meeting with ACC Futures. Then following that, it's just been a number of discussions that have been had. I've had a discussion with the president of the Arts Collective. I've had a discussion with a number of different people who've been involved in the arts and a few people from Akwesasne. We've just begun our initial meetings. how committed. I don't know what other suggestions you have heard for that area. I've heard hotel, pretty lackluster. I've heard a few suggestions that really haven't piqued my interest, and I think one of the challenges that we have had with the development of that particular area has been the engagement of our partners in Akwesasne and in giving them a reason to feel invested in that project. And so when this opportunity came about, it felt like a natural fit to say, we are presenting an opportunity that will give value to your community, where you will see yourselves represented on the waterfront on this side of the border in a community where you belong.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, as I said, I've heard a number of different ideas. I know one time in a conversation with the Grand Chief, I asked the question as to what was appropriate for that site, and I went out on a limb. I've had some experience with the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations and some action with regards to addressing some of the concerns. And I tell you what would be the number one item on my list if I was making a proposal through the Harborlands project: an educational center on truth and reconciliation, a full study situation native to North America's Truth and Reconciliation in accordance with the United Nations Aboriginal recommendations, and that would put Cornwall on the map. That would also make a huge impact in the understanding of truth and reconciliation. Just a simple suggestion, like, you know, just one of these ideas. But at the same time, in that this project has come so far, I know, like, I share some of the concerns of councillors McIntosh and Hollingsworth, but I think it's time to move ahead. And there's no reason why, at any point in time, the community of Akwesasne can't be invited to participate in this, because I would love to go to an art center where we might be able to see a Norvo Moriso art exhibition along with Chuck Harrison and in the same venue. And that stuff. You want to talk about truth and reconciliation, you want to talk about First Nations arts and that stuff. Plus maybe the study of Buffy St. Marie and her music, you know. It's all there. I think that right now, and that it's time to make the decision and move forward, because time's a wasting, and whatever would be possible for the Harborlands, it's another decade down the road. In truth and fact, in my mind, it's at least a decade down the road.
Is that accurate?
Mr. Ball, do you want to make comments?
Yeah. I've communicated this to the co-ownership, but I believe as a planner that the harbor needs a professional planning exercise. There are all kinds of people who have great ideas of what should occur there, and I think, you know, we went out to the community and we asked them what they thought should go there, and we have all kinds of good comments and opinions. But I think we really need to do a professional planning exercise at that property. You know, there are issues of compatibility. You know, there are people living there. Do you want loud music there, or do you not want? There are compatibility issues. There are, you know, you need to look at the road network, the environment. There are all kinds of issues that need to be considered to come up with the proper land use of that location. And I think it's great that we're talking about the ideas of what can occur there, but I think we need a sophisticated planning exercise on that property, and to work together with Akwesasne to determine that. I'm not sure what the time frame is. I surely hope that it's not 10 years. I hope that it's more like 5 years, but perhaps that's ambitious. But of course, we need to, you know, this is not, because it's co-owned, you can't necessarily just build anything on that property. It's a co-ownership who owns the property. So for example, we're not going to see condominiums necessarily sold on that property because it's a co-ownership. What happened? How do you sell something that belongs to a co-ownership? So it's not an easy property.
Thank you. Councillor McDonald and Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just want to be clear, I'm speaking against the motion to defer here. That's what we're talking about.
Yes, we're debating the motion to defer.
Right, because my support for the center is obviously 100%. And I have so many reasons why I disagree with the motion to defer, and the first one is the time that's involved. Let me simply say this, time is money. At one time, the project to renovate the Bank of Montreal was $6 million. Now we're at 10. Next year, as Councillor Hébert said, it's likely going to be 13. So time is money. And if money is one of the criteria we use in making our judgment as whether to go ahead or not, certainly we can't defer. This community has been working actively since 2013. That's when we got our first donation made. Now, people who have given us money, that's 10 years ago, they're going to think we're kind of frauds. Give us your money, we'll collect the interest, and just do it for another 5 years, 10 years. Are we going to be a joke? I'm afraid that if we don't go ahead now with this, that Ms. Burke, who has a letter ready to send out to all our donors. It's a good newsletter. She waited till tonight. She was going to send it out and let everybody know what their money has brought them thus far. And I would hate to think that she's going to go home tonight and change that letter and say, whoops, sorry, I have bad news for you. Because if we don't do this now, we can't do it. She'll be going home and she'll be saying, I'm sorry, the dream died. It died on the council table. And I'm serious about that. You can't keep money from people that long and not spend it. So, we're going to give them back the interest as a show of our good faith? No, we have to, I think, at some point either spend this money or give it back. But I think the biggest impediment, I so appreciate your desire to do something for reconciliation. I really think this should be our overarching concern in all we do. But I can't see us saying to our neighbors and our co-owners, we have this great idea for something to build on your land. We wanted it, we've saved money for years, and now let's do it on this land we share. There's some historical precedents there that just tell me this is not the way to go. If this idea were to come from Akwesasne, then we would entertain it. But how in the world would we sell it to our partners in Akwesasne? In the arts community, we have done a great deal in terms of reconciliation. We have ensured that we always inaugurate people from Akwesasne who are part of our community into our Hall of Fame, for example. We've had art shows in this very building before there was any hint of refurbishment. The building was a wreck, and we'd always ask Jamie, we'll be safe, We'll make sure that nobody goes upstairs without our warning them about the stairs and the condition of the building. But we had artists from Akwesasne there demonstrating their work. So believe me, we've got a wonderful ground, we've got a basis here for wonderful collaboration in art. But I think for us to impose our idea on land that they own, with us, mind you, but still, this is a Cornwall baked idea. And I think at the 11th hour to say, oh, wait a minute, let's do it better. It'll just take us 10 extra years. No, we can't do that. Just environmentally alone. Look at how long it took them to get that hole dug at Belmont and Montreal Road. Now, the hole's been lying idle for a long time, but the environmental cleanup that happened there, I mean, my gosh, you get these surprises even when you start to dig, eh? So there's so many things you can't predict. Like, I will wholly support any initiative for reconciliation, but that's not on the table here. This is about our art center in a building we bought 5 years ago now. We bought that building, and it's going to be fully accessible. We're lowering the floor. Let's go ahead with this now. We will have a wonderful complement of art facilities to offer the community, but we can't delay it. Literally, you can't. We've been hanging on to this money for way too many years to say, oh, wait, another 5 years, 10 years. Can't do that. So I beg you, colleagues, please defer I vote against the motion to defer. Let's do this tonight. Thank you.
Councilor Gardner.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I don't know how the hell I'm going to follow this one. Well done. I was thinking of coming from another direction, and it comes to the Arts Center. First of all, there's no way I want to defer it. I'm sorry, through the chair. That's not going to happen tonight with me anyway. But I'm looking at the future of the city of Cornwall. We have Great Wolf Lodge, which is coming in, that's going to spend millions and millions of dollars. We have DevCore along the waterfront that's going to spend almost $1 billion from what I can understand, which will make Cornwall a destination place. People are going to come to Cornwall, the destination place, say, no, they don't have an arts center there because they deferred it. Not going to happen. That arts center and the building at the corner of 2nd and Pitt Street, the new apartment building, was going to make the downtown businesses a destination point because people will be living at that corner. People will be coming to the arts center from all over the Ontario and Quebec. We've seen that already. I don't want to defer this. It's time. This city is moving forward with those projects, and I want this to continue, the arts building. Continue, and we'll pay for it. We'll find a way to pay for it. I don't want to do like one of my confrères one day and said, never, 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 because I'm never going to defer this. It's not going to happen. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Part of the year.
Thank you, Councilor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Last week, I had an interesting conversation with two of my colleagues about this Arts Center, and it was a good conversation because some ideas were shared. I didn't necessarily disagree with some of the things that were said. I even spoke a little bit about, a little piece of this project that was missing that I was kind of hoping to see. And since that conversation, it's I've been thinking about it. And then I see this in the agenda, and I've been thinking about it. And I can really appreciate where my colleague, Councillor Good's coming with trying to do something with our partners down at the Portlands. And I had written down here before my colleague, Mr. Sabri, mentioned the Education Center for Truth and Reconciliation. That doesn't have to be tied to an arts center. And I think if that's something that was down there, I think that would probably have a more powerful partnership with our neighbors in the steps to truth and reconciliation than an arts center will. And also, has been stated, there's nothing stopping our neighbors from joining this project in some way or highlighting their works at this project over the years to come. And so, as much as I appreciated that conversation that we had, I've really, you really made me think about it. And in that conversation, I had mentioned that the piece I was missing was something we talked about at the early stages, was like practice space that would be built in this place. And then I got to thinking, I'm not an artist, and I'm going to frequent shows and all those wonderful things that a patron of the arts would do, but I don't use it. So if the artists are involved in this, are happy with this plan, who am I as a non-artist to say, I think you're doing it wrong? So I've even had to challenge my own thinking in the last 5-6 days since our conversation. So, we talk about spending money. We're $1 million into this already or more. You want to waste taxpayers' money? Cancel this project. Go tell them we just threw $1 million down the drain. Because if you think you're going to get the money back out of a building that's in that kind of shape, I think we're dreaming a little bit there. The taxpayers right now, the ones that I've spoken to about an arts center that were opposed to it, the conversations were strange. It would be things like, well, if they're that passionate about the arts center, get them to get businesses to donate those supplies. Well, you didn't say that when we built the Benson Center. You expected that we were going to pay for it as a community, and we did. And we can't compare prices with the Benson Center, with all due respect to my colleague across the way, because it was like more than a decade ago. Like, no price right now is going to be comparable to that. So to think that you could build the Benson Center today for $32 million, that won't happen. The other thing is, I got involved in this arts center and making the arts a bigger thing in the city of Cornwall back in 2010, when the first time I ran for council. And I can remember the Culturescape plan being launched, and former councillor Denis Thibault was a big push on that, and he got it going. And I can remember the excitement in the room. And one of the things that came out of that was the creation of the Culture Plan Committee, and I believe you sat on that original committee. And somebody in this room sat on that committee too, and you know, she's already been called out once, so I guess I'll do it again. Rose Denoyer was on that committee at the same time, and I can remember going over, you know, what the city's done to this point and how many times things got canceled. Like an arts coordinator for the city, canceled. All these plans canceled. The list was a mile long of things that we canceled because the spending money on the arts was a waste of time. But let's build a rink, that's no problem. It was just weird, but Rose said to me in those early days, I don't think I'll see an arts center in my lifetime. And I said to her, Rose, this is gonna happen. This is gonna happen. And then as the years went on, and the second term of that committee started, I started to see the ugly side of politics and the things that they play in these kinds of things. And I got to the point where I was thinking, I'm not gonna see an arts center in my lifetime. And then having a conversation with Rose, and I don't know if she remembers this, but it's gotta be, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, I kind of made that statement, and she said, it's gonna happen. Suddenly, she's telling me, but what I was trying to tell her 4 or 5 years before that. And the excitement of the group that's here, you know, if you got involved with it, it's quite special to see how they've rallied. And you'll never raise $1 million for this. We got challenged to raise $1 million for this, and I remember being at that meeting thinking, ooh, he's nuts. And here we are at 1.4, and there's definitely gonna be more coming down the pipe, but you can hear it from the conversations that are happening. And I don't see the point in this deferral, only because, for me personally speaking, as one member of this council, I'm not changing my mind. I've done my little bit in this journey back in 2011, I guess, when the committee started, and I visited the arts centers with a group of friends that were interested in getting arts centers. We, on our own, went around and we saw, and so we're talking about this could be so much more. We have to remember, we're a town of 50,000 people. Go to Brockville, Kingston, Gananoque, Belleville, look at their arts centers. It's a theater. There's more already in what we're planning to do down there than just a theater, much more. And is it as much as we were gonna have when we first talked about the complex? No. Maybe was that too big of a plan for the city? Maybe. But I do know that we've dotted a lot of I's, we've crossed a lot of T's, and I am certainly comfortable moving ahead with this project today. It's not going to get any cheaper, so we put it off by a year. You're probably adding a couple $1 million to it. Where's the benefit to our taxpayer with that? There's none. So if this is something we're going to do anyway, then let's just do it, because we have people that have donated their time and their money before we've talked about donating our money. So not donating, but borrowing our money to do this project. So the pieces are in place. I think at this point, to stop the project would be so disheartening. And then Rose and I will be having a conversation again about, we're never gonna see this in our lifetime. And I don't wanna have that conversation again with anybody. So, you know, the campaign slogan for the fundraising was be the link. And I can tell you right now, we don't wanna be the weak one. So I'm voting for it.
Councillor Dupel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we're speaking on the deferral, and I take this opportunity to reflect and think that, you know, often we're told as city leaders, city councilors, that, you know, we're not moving the city forward, which we are, and sometimes that's hard for people to vision. I think this is a prime example, like pretty impressive to say $1.4 million raised by members of our community. And I think that it's discussions like this that when we're looking at $1.4 million being raised by local people, that it can put a real it can dampen community spirit at this point when we're looking at that. And now we're saying, so the two things I take away from tonight is that we have people who have been passionate about it. I've been on city council for the past 12 years and we've talked about arts year after year. I think I'm very cautious when it comes to budget time, and yes, numbers are alarming, and I always try advocate for keeping the taxes as low as possible. But the two things I take away from tonight is that we have an opportunity to move forward, and we have an opportunity to celebrate those who have impressively helped bring in $1.4 million for a facility that they want. And I also take away that we committed it to this. And back when we did commit to it, was the price tag different? Yes. But tonight I worry that the talks that we're having is sort of jeopardizing what commitment we actually had for the Arts Center. So I will not vote for the deferral. I will support the project moving forward, and I commend those who have stepped up and have put their name to their cause that they wanted to, and continued to raise money and continue today to raise money. And I look at, you know, what we will look like if we go back and say to the corporate sponsor who's going to be have the naming rights to it, that, you know, now the location's changing, and to all of the people who have contributed that money. I think you would have to go back and do a clean slate and say to these people, you want your money back, and then we can sell you our new pitch. And I just don't think that's where we need to be. And so I will vote against the deferral this evening.
Councilor Ngunjo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I would like to ask to the clerk, roughly how many hours did you spend since we started speaking about this project a few years ago on this project? Can you imagine it? Do you have any idea of how many hours of people work on this project since it started?
More for you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. As I said earlier, I've not been involved. It's funny because I sat in this chair when we brought this property to council in an acting role. Brought this to council to consider purchasing this property. It was right out of the blue. That was probably my largest involvement. Ever since then, it's been mostly people like Jamie and others. Tracy's been involved as well. And it's been mostly the community and our work with the community. I should add also that there's a committee that worked with Jamie on this facility and what the facility should look like. So of course there's been an architect who's been very involved. We've spent a fair amount of money with an architect. So it's money, it's hours, and a lot of hours. The number of hours from volunteers and the fundraising leadership is I don't even know where to start, because we would get emails monthly from them to update us on how things are coming along. So if I had to guess on hours, I'd be the wrong person to answer that. I'm not sure, Jamie, if you have any comments.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, I wouldn't know where to start, I guess, to try and total the number of hours. I can say that when I started my former position as the manager of recreation and facilities 7 years ago, one of the first projects I was working on that year was the feasibility study for this arts center. And I know talks had been ongoing for a long time prior to that, but this project has been very active since for these past 7 years. And so whether my time, like Mark mentions, the volunteers that sat on this design committee with us, as well as a team of consultants to do the design, it has been a very considerable effort over these past 7 years to bring the project to this stage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. The point I wanted to rise up is, yes, I understand the point of my colleague Dean. Certainly, it's going to be expensive, but as I understand, a lot has been done before. We spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy on that. So if we put that in the balance, I'm not sure that if we we put it for the next time, we're gonna make something positive. So I'm like, we should go further now. I think it's a good timing. And then plus, when I was hearing my colleague discussing about this project, I try to dream. Sometimes it's very important to try to dream, because I wanted to imagine what will be this community, what will be this city on the next decade if we have this facility, what is going to bring. And I was saying, Dev Core bringing a lot of people, a lot of newcomers, a lot of visitors in the city. Maybe in the other side, the water park that we're trying to get. And with this art facility, so I think it's going to be something very, it's amazing for our community. So once again, we need to be courageous, and I think it's time to go further, and I'm not going to support the motion of Sarah, my colleague Sarah, so I think it's time to go further. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Max actually has to speak a second time.
Did I speak on the, I thought I spoke on the previous motion, not the
You
deferral.
spoke on the deferral, so.
Did I? Yeah, okay.
Gets worse, Mac.
So I will speak before you close up, Councillor Good. I've been around this table for a few years now as well. My first term, I was appointed to the Culture Plan Committee, and at the time, I was a little surprised. And I didn't know much about it or anything about it. During that time, I had the chance to work with, before Councillor Bennett, just Todd Bennett, members of the community who were in the gallery here tonight, and I learned a lot about arts and culture in the city and the plans that we had prepared. And through that, learned the need for this. This has been an ongoing discussion for a long time. I think Councillor McDonald's right. We purchased this building some time ago. The opportunity did come out of the blue. I remember when it happened. I wasn't happy with the Civic Complex location, to be honest with you, and I thought this was a great alternative. And the idea was to put something in the downtown as well that would benefit the downtown businesses, restaurants, add to the DBIA, et cetera, and so forth. Certainly value to that, especially with the historical nature of the building. A lot has been said tonight, so I'm not going to repeat a lot of it, but I think it is time to move forward. I think that, you know, I do have, you know, obviously I keep all expenses in mind, but in the same vein, when we talk about comparator cities, and this has come up before, when we look at Belleville, Brockville, Kingston, etc., and we're consistently compared to them, they all have art centers. This is the one piece we're missing, realistically. I'm sure there's other pieces, but this is the one big piece that we're missing. And in order for us to move forward and become that true world-class city, we need something like this. I do want to say, though, that I want to thank Councillor Good for thinking outside the box here. And I think that she should not be vilified for her suggestion at all. I think trying to propose an idea to work closer with Akwesasne is definitely admirable. I just think the timing is unfortunately not right. I think that, you know, I'm on the Port Lands Committee as well, and we are starting to make some good progress there, but there's a long way to go there. And had this, excuse me, the opportunity lined up, perhaps that could have been a discussion we could have had. But when I look at the timeline of how long we've been working on this, rising costs, other factors, this is over budget, yes, sure. However, it's not awful. In terms of that, we will have to borrow, and that's fine. But I want to commend those in the gallery tonight who were involved in the fundraising efforts. You exceeded all expectations.
Don't stop.
You honestly did, because I think that challenge that was put out there was, you know, at the time, people thought it's not going to happen. Not only did you meet it, you exceeded it. You know, you're well on your way to doubling it. So kudos to all of you who have been involved and spent a lot of time collecting those funds. So for that reason, I will be against the deferral and in favor of supporting the tender at this time. But again, Thank you, Councillor Good, for proposing ideas at this table and stimulating and generating discussion around this table for the betterment of our community. For that, you should be commended. And I'll let you wrap up.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I wasn't going to cry earlier, I will. I really appreciate that. I knew that bringing this forward, I would be putting myself in the crosshairs. We have a community that has so much potential, and timing really is everything. I knew the timing wasn't great for this, but I also knew that not bringing it forward and not presenting this idea, I would regret it. And I really didn't think it would fly, but I thought, you know what? Let's just see what happens, because it is worthy of discussion. I am so grateful for the arts community that we have and for the dedication of the people who've been involved in this project to date. We are going to move forward. As I stated at the beginning, I support this center. Regardless of what iteration it looks like, I know that what we're doing is right. I thank my colleagues for entertaining this idea, because I know it's big and I know it kind of came out of nowhere, but I just got on here like a few months ago, so cut me some slack. I hope that having this conversation will propel further conversations about how we can use opportunities that we are already looking into and already investing in, and saying, how can we partner with our neighbors to the south in Akwesasne and create meaningful reconciliation. And I hope that everyone from the arts community does not take this as an attempt to shoot this down, an attempt to kill it in the water. That was not the attempt at all. On my part, this one is an attempt to make the most out of something that I know our community is so passionate about, and do something that will really bring us pride as a community. I'm confident with the plans that are being presented, and I've heard the message loud and clear, so I think you can go ahead with the vote for deferral.
Okay, so call the vote on the deferral. All in favor of the deferral? As your motion, you technically
I have to.
I am sorry, Councillor.
That's okay.
All against the deferral? Deferral does not carry. We move back to the main motion. The motion has an existing mover and seconder. Is there any more discussion on the motion, Councillor McIntosh?
Well, it's not in that motion, but I don't believe Sarah was caught in the crosshairs. I don't think she was vilified. Just because you disagree with somebody's comments doesn't mean you vilify them or put them in the crosshairs. I just want to make you aware of that I respect your decision, but I don't agree with it, and that doesn't mean there's any nastiness involved and whatnot.
Thank you for that. Councillor Dupel.
Before we go to the vote, Mr. Mayor, can we have a recorded vote?
Yes, we can. Is there, Councillor McDonald, I can allow you to wrap up as the original mover of the motion.
Yes, if nobody else wants to speak. So I'd just like to say, I want to thank all my colleagues for your wonderful supportive words and the testimonials of the recognition of the value of this art center to our community. We know the dollar price, but tonight you have really expressed articulately the value of the arts in our community and the value that the Arts Center will be in our community. So thank you for that, and I will urge you to continue to support the arts and the Arts Center. And I think there's a minor omission. We named a few people here tonight, but we didn't name Robert Prouse, who's the man who made the first little phone call to the city, say, hey, I went to the bank today and they were closed. Maybe we can get the building. And that was him who brought that idea forward, and look where we are now. We dropped the complex, which was it was a bad idea, we all recognized it, but, and this is how we got the bank. So, please, I urge my colleagues to support this. It's time.
Thank you. Madam Clerk.
A recorded vote. Councillors Claude McIntosh.
In favor of the tender.
Dean Hollingsworth.
Opposed?
Maurice Dupel.
In favor.
Sarah Good.
In favor.
Caroline Hébert.
In favor.
And Councillors Elaine McDonald.
In favor?
Sid Gardner.
In favor.
Denis Sabourin.
it.
In favor.
Todd Bennett.
favor.
Fred Gunjo,
In favor.
and Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Carries, Mr. Mayor.
Motion is carried.
Go.
You represent the deal point, and it's over there. I'm all here
Oh, I know it.
I'm going to hear tomorrow morning at 10:00. Guarantee you.
Agenda items you guys.
They're waiting for it.
Really interesting
You don't.
business, not just good stuff.
Council, we still have a lot more meeting left, so we're going to move on to resolutions.
They'll be waiting for me.
Consent reports. Supply and delivery of pharmaceutical for paramedic services, with a recommendation that the corporation enter into a contract with Silver Fox Pharmacy for the non-exclusive provision and delivery of pharmaceuticals for paramedic services from time of award to October 31st, 2023, with the option to renew for 2 additional one-year terms. CPEG February, Heart of the City and Brownfield, with the recommendation that council approve the 6 Cornwall Planning Programs Evaluation Group recommendations as presented on February 2nd, 2023.
Motion. Counselor McDonald, Counselor Bennett, all in favor? Carried, thank you.
There are no resolutions, Mr. Mayor, so we are looking for a motion to receive the unfinished business listing for February 27th.
Motion, Counselor Bennett, seconded Counselor Gardner. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried, thank you.
Communication Report 2, 2023 Development Charges Draft Bylaw with the following recommendation: that council approve the capital project listing set out in Chapter 5 of the DC Background Study dated January 26, 2023, subject to further annual review during the capital budget process, and that pursuant to Section 10(1) of the Development Charges Act 1997, the 2023 DC Background Study dated January 23, 2023, prepared by Watson and Associates Economists Ltd. Be adopted, and that with city's endorsement of the 2023 DC background study, the DC bylaw will be included for approval on the agenda of the council meeting of March 27th. And finally, that it be confirmed that council has determined that no further notice or public meetings are required pursuant to Section 12 of the Development Charges Act.
Motion. Counselor Good, Counselor McIntosh. Any discussion? Counselor McIntosh.
Just wondering, we could have used this first, so Mr. Stevens could have gotten his way back to Mississauga a lot earlier. He's been sitting here all night.
Maybe he's in favor of that, so.
Make him a hotel reservation.
Further discussion? All in favor? Carried, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stevens.
910 Montreal Road Residential Development with a recommendation that council approve a site-specific tax increment grant for 20 years at 90% for the residential development of 160 rental units at 910 Montreal Road in Cornwall, proposed by 910 Montreal Road LP.
Sorry, 1 second. Ms. Bailey, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Further to the report for the development charges bylaw, this is council's opportunity to make any changes to that bylaw subsequent to the information that Mr. Stevens has provided to us and through our public meeting discussion. Currently, the bylaw at the March 27th meeting would be part of the bylaw section of that meeting and presented as seen in Appendix E. So just so that council is aware, this is council's opportunity if they are looking to make any changes that be discussed this evening so that we can incorporate those changes in the bylaw.
So that would include the phased in versus...
Correct. I just wanted to make sure council understood that the bylaw coming is as presented, not with a phase-in, et cetera, if that is what council desires.
So we did two-thirds majority, do we address that?
Well, perhaps somebody can help us understand exactly what in the recommendations that were adopted indicates that we're going to the proposed bylaw or if we're amending the bylaw.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, this report at the end says the purpose of this report is to obtain council direction regarding the DC policy related matters, and that direction be incorporated into the final DC bylaw for the March 27th meeting.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, if I understand properly, it would be a whole new motion if council wanted to give you direction one way or the other. So that would be not a reconsideration, but just a regular motion.
Correct.
Okay, so
Thank
at this
you,
time,
Madam Clerk.
I'll entertain motions regarding the DC bylaw. If anyone wants to, Councillor Hollingsworth?
Well, so, just a question, Your Worship, before I start saying what's on page, I guess, of the initial agenda, the official page, motion reads the ABCD. Our finance manager asking for us to do something different than what's on that page?
46.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we are not asking you to do anything different than what's on this page. Those A, B, C, and D do need to be approved by council to move this forward, but council can add an E as an example, as we did when we looked at the first DC background study.
Now, just on a technicality, Your Worship, and then I'll yield the floor. Technically speaking, council could, correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Clerk, council could vote in favor of this and then vote against its bylaw 3 weeks from now at the next meeting, correct? We can vote on any bylaw anytime we want, and approve or disapprove regardless, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that is correct, but I think what Mrs. Bailey is indicating is that if you give direction this evening, one way or the other, the bylaw should fit council's vision of
I
it.
appreciate that. All I'm saying is to my colleagues, especially for those who just spent the next month or two, from a technical point of view, then yes, we should probably, if we have an issue, we should probably bring it up now. However, for the record, if we say, yeah, we're good with this, and you get 20 billion phone calls, you can still vote against the bylaw at the moment of truth. You're not married to it. However, that gets me to my last question. If by some happenstance, Ms. Bailey, council did vote yes tonight and then said, now we changed our mind, what technically would happen then? Like what happens to the municipality?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as Mr. Stephen discussed with council, the city's current DC bylaw expires April 10th. So we do need a bylaw in place by April 10th to continue to collect DC charges.
We wouldn't have a meeting, through you, Your Worship, to the clerk, we wouldn't have a meeting until after April 10th.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe if my memory serves me correct, it's April 13th or 14th.
Just to make sure we all know what we're talking about, Your Worship. Now, that being said, do you need a new motion, Your Worship? In light of the fact that we voted on it, then said, wait, no, maybe we shouldn't vote on it. So do you need a new motion? Are you looking for?
Depends on your intent, Councillor
Well, I'm
Hollingsworth.
going to support the recommendations on page, on the agenda, A, B, C, D. I don't have an E or an F or a G. I'm good with the four that have been recommended. I listened to the report. Some, contractors asked for a different schedule, but I'm not prepared to do that. So I'm okay with the four that are recommended, and I'll make that as a motion if I can get a second. We do A, B, C, and D.
We just did that.
We already passed that already, Councillor
Okay,
Hollingsworth.
so then I'm fine. Just wanted to make sure I knew what we were doing. Fair enough.
Time for you.
Is there any further discussion on development charges before we move forward?
You can really see them.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor.
next item.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so I read out the recommendation for 910 Montreal Road. Was there a motion for that?
Not yet. Councillor Gardner, Councillor Bennett, discussion.
Question.
Okay, Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Hollingsworth.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mark, just to get it on the record, no zoning changes needed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. There were variances required to the bylaw, but they were dealt with in a minor variance application which received public notice and input.
Good. Sounds,
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Quick question, Your Worship, to, I guess, Mr. Bello. Do we know when the shovel is in the ground and we're rolling along with this based on, I can't remember the report. Do you know when contractor's thinking of rolling, starting?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't I know that the schedule, they appreciated that we would try to get this out with as quickly as possible so that we could possibly see development started this year. I'm hopeful that that's still the case, but I understand that, you know, in speaking with Ms. McLean last week, and I explained to her that we were trying to advance this to this meeting, I believe it was appreciated that that would happen, so.
Thank you. Just as a comment, Your Worship, I look at the corner of Pitt and Second, see the building going up. It seems like it's long overdue. It's kind of, we talk about the arts center, but on the private sector side, the notion of a residential component going back to that corner and filling in a hole that, quite frankly, always kind of bothered me a little bit, the residential sort of people doing their business down there. This particular project is very much the same, passing by the empty lot on the corner that we're talking about. Always made me think, gee, what a shame, wouldn't it be great for the east end of town to get some residential kind of moving back to there, and the fact that it meets a lot of the criteria. Admittedly, we're gonna potentially lose some tax dollars, but quite frankly, I see it as an investment in our community, so I'm very excited about the project. And anything we can do to move this along, I'm all in. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, we're not gonna lose any taxes. We're not gonna gain taxes as quickly, but we will gain from day one.
Maybe the word was loose, but, forget it, I'm not gonna use it. Whatever you wanna do, Mr. Boileau, carry on.
hey, you're dealing with an English teacher here.
I mean, we could do this all night.
Councillor Good?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just curious, like, in terms of the actual 90% reduction over 20 years, is this something that the developer, like, is the build contingent upon that? Have they expressed that, or is this something that we are kind of going above and beyond and offering to them?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as I think you're familiar, we identified 6 sites to put this onto, and it happened to go onto this property, and they purchased the property with the program applying to the property. I think to answer your question, I think the program is very much appreciated, allows the development to occur. I can't answer the question of whether it would occur without, but certainly, we have always felt that we need to provide incentive to get what we're trying to achieve, which is more units, more affordable units. So those are two different things, right? This building provides both of those things. Provides affordable units, but also provides more market units. And if we can do this on all of those 6 sites, I think we're gonna be in so much better a situation than
Awesome.
we are today.
I just wanted clarification around, like, that tax increment grant for those 6 sites has already been, like, announced and presented as 90% over 20 years. They're aware of that. This isn't something, because I know there was the 80% over 10 years for a number of other sites.
That is
I
the
don't,
generic.
I wasn't here for that discussion, so I just don't have the background on it. I mean, because I know it's not lost. You know, it's not lost avenue. I'm not sure how you would put it. Sorry, it's late now.
Opportunity.
But it's lost opportunity. $12 million.
Right.
Gosh, I could think of a few things we could do with that. That was why I was asking that question, to see if this was something that they were already prepared for, and if we make a change, like if we are even able to make a change to say, well, let's make it 80% or 90% over 15 years. Like, do we even have the authority at this time to humor those kinds of changes?
Again, it was purchased with the program in
Okay.
place.
That's fine.
So I think that says a lot.
Yes, it does.
Versus you know, that they had purchased it and then we applied the program.
Thank you.
Further comments, questions? Okay, I have one. Was hoping to get some commentary on the affordable housing aspect of this build.
Lisa Smith could provide commentary.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Hopefully you can all hear me. This is in the right spot. So there's different definitions of affordable, right? So there's also a concept called attainable market, which would be looking at how do we keep our market rates, even though they are market, within acceptable levels. So the lower end of this rental scale would fall within that.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Just a follow-up, could you indicate how many units that would include if you have the number and what that rent would be?
I think I would actually, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I'd actually defer that to Mr. Boileau to answer.
So there was a fair amount of work, through you, Mr. Mayor, a fair amount of work that went into this. When we first received the proposal from them, there weren't as, so the number, the answer to your question is 50%. So 50% of these units fall in the definition of affordable. It wasn't 50% the first time we got this proposal. And as a result, and so the developer said to us, well, my units are actually very comparable to what is occurring at Pitt and Second in terms of this is a higher valued project. It has underground parking. It is a concrete building. It's 12 stories, etc. But anyway, to make it affordable, he had to reduce the size of certain units. And however, the unit sizes are comparable to what we approved at the corner of Pitt and Second. So we're achieving. The proposal was about 120 units previously. Now it's at 160 units. So yes, the units are smaller, but they're affordable. And we saw units on 9th Street last week that are part of our Cornwall housing project on 9th Street that are comparable size to what we're talking about. They seem small in square footage, but it's actually reasonable. We experienced it, so.
Thank you for that. All in favor of the motion? Unanimous, thank you.
Next item is the Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada update.
So I wanted to take this opportunity to provide an update on IRCC and our meetings and what has been happening. I'd like to thank council members who were able to attend the meeting yesterday. I know it wasn't a convenient time for everyone, especially on a Sunday and with the short notice. But going back a few weeks, after MP Duncan had raised the issue in the House of Commons and Senator Clement had raised the issue in a committee on Parliament Hill, I received contact from IRCC to have a meeting with Assistant Deputy Minister Harris and Director General Carol McQueen. And that meeting took place, I believe it was 2 Fridays ago now. Myself, Mr. Boileau, Ms. Morgan, Bob Peters, MP Duncan, and Sergeant Knezovic from the Cornwall Police were in the room. And we had a very good discussion with IRCC. They seemed receptive to our concerns, which is something that I would argue hadn't been happening previously with regard to this cohort of asylum claimants. And we were able to provide costings, which have been shared with council and publicly as well in terms of the financial impact to the city, not just the city directly, but greater impact that is anticipated throughout the community as well. And from there, we really do feel that communication and relationship will improve. Following that meeting on the Tuesday, we had a virtual meeting with Minister Sean Fraser, who is the Minister of IRCC. And again, once again, it was the same individuals from the city representing our interests to the minister and his staff. And once again, we had a fruitful discussion. Concerns were raised again to the costs downloaded to the city and the strain on our resources. Once again, I felt the minister was receptive. There are some limitations up front of what they can do. For example, IRCC does not have a pot of cash necessarily allocated to compensate the city for economic losses, those tied to economic development, for example, like the municipal accommodation tax. But there could potentially be something we could look at as an alternative for that. Following this, we had a meeting yesterday on Sunday with community agencies and IRCC, once again, ADM Harris. and the Director General McQueen attended. And concerns, it gave community groups the opportunity to raise questions, and I know some councillors asked questions at that time as well, to RCC directly to get answers and to communicate on how the community can work together to support asylum claimants and their needs in the community. And once again, I think that meeting went well. There are some takeaways, and I think going forward, I should also mention that our MPP Nolan Quinn and Senator Clement and their offices and their staff respectively were heavily involved in the organization of that meeting, as were staff here at the City of Cornwall, and those individuals attended, as well as MP Duncan and his staff. And I think going forward, again, I'm cautiously optimistic. I do believe we're finally being heard. I am hopeful that our concerns will be addressed, but we just have to wait and see now. We need to give some time to RCC to see if we're going to make progress on this, and communication will continue in a more productive fashion, and that our concerns will be taken seriously, and that we can look to recoup our costs and the strain that have been placed on our resources moving forward. And we trust that RCC will start to look at more long-term planning as opposed to the shorter term, typically a 3-month window that they've been undertaking recently. So I think with that, there's been a lot of coverage on this topic in the media, a lot of interest in the media nationwide. Everybody's watching, and that's important. And we have to get this right, of course. And I am, again, hopeful that going forward it'll be more productive. I don't know if Mr. Boileau has anything to add to that?
No, I think you've covered it well. I want to make it, a lot of council was there yesterday, so what I'm going to say is not really new to you, but I was interested in the MPP's comment, Nolan Quinn, about the impact that this has on our MAT, and how he may try to, or he will try to see if there can be recuperation of somehow of that MAT money, because we estimate it to be over $300,000, which is important to the tourism sector.
At this time, before I turn over to the council, if they have any further comments or questions, I will say that there are opportunities here. A lot of these individuals, we heard yesterday the difference between a refugee, an immigrant, and an asylum claimant. I'm not going to try to define them right now, because I will honestly probably get them wrong. But we will have an opportunity from someone from RCC to come present to council, and at the time we'll ask them to reiterate that, because there's an important distinction there. And one thing we need to say is that a lot of these individuals are arriving with skills that are needed in our community across Canada. The example given where a number of doctors had landed, and they are now working in northern Alberta and northern BC, truthfully, because those provinces recognize their credentials a lot easier than Ontario, and that's just the nature of it. So I won't fault for northern parts of those provinces for getting doctors, because they need them probably worse than we do, and we need doctors. There's no doubt about that. So there are, good news stories coming out of this with supports for countrywide. I know locally PSWs have been hired, including by the City of Cornwall. I know Leclerc has hired folks as well. So there are needs being met. Right now there are students in schools. I believe the number was 60. That's probably rising. There are classrooms set up at the Dev Center where students are learning from teachers provided by the school board. So there are a lot of good things happening. But again, our concern remains the strain on resources, our systems, the systems of our community partners, as well as some serious concerns were brought up yesterday, from our healthcare sector as well, and the way that it's structured in terms of how they would receive funding to offset their costs. So these are discussions that we're going to have going forward. It's a continuing situation. And I think with that, I'll open the floor to council if there's any comments or questions at this time. Councillor Ngunjo and Councillor McDonald. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I would like just to add that it's an opportunity for the city to, I don't know if we had the opportunity to go to visit, to see how those people are living in the hotel. If we didn't all be interested to open like a bridge, let's say that, because as you say, there is a lot of potential, and maybe we can gain as community from those newcomers, from those new refugees. So for sure I'm going to get there. If some colleagues are interested, maybe we can do it as a team. And at the same time, we can start discussing with those new residents to understand the need, and to see what they can bring to our community. So maybe we can, I don't know how we can deal with that. I know that it's, we are very, very busy with budget and all those stuff, but I think we can start emailing about that, and those will be interested. Maybe we can do something in this way.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Councillor Nunjo. I think that's something we can look at, you know. I don't think any asylum claimants are, like, while some, you know, they rotate in and out, I don't think they're gonna be leaving the Dev anytime soon. So even if we're still in budget and we're still having a lot of meetings and our schedules are busy, I think we'll find the time. And that's something I can discuss with the CAO and staff to maybe coordinate and arrange as well. Councillor McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just continuing something that Councillor Nunjo said there, the concept of us establishing a bridge. Just by fluke today, I met a group of the asylum seekers. They had been invited by the Rotary Club to a lunch, and I was walking through, so I had lunch too. And I have to say that I met the asylum seekers, and I told them that you had been meeting with the IRCC and also local officials, and no pressure, Mr. Mayor, but I told them you were going to work wonders.
No pressure.
But it's really great that, you know, we're working on getting a formalized program. But I have to say that the thing that they spoke most often about was how grateful they were for everything that ACFO did for them. Because I understand there's an agency now that got the contract, but they sure don't have the bridge building skills that ACFO did, which is what people who are strangers to the community need to experience if they're going to put down roots in this community and not just stay here for 3 months or whatever it is and then move on somewhere else. So I really hope that you're able to manage that, because the group that is administering them, I think it's a group out of Montreal, LLS or something like that.
LSS, yeah.
And so they're sort of lacking is the community connection there, and I hope that at whatever opportunity comes up that we're able to establish that.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Thank you for your confidence. I will say that ACFO does deserve a lot of credit and recognition for the work they did initially. It was federal procurement issues that stepped in, and because they're not a qualified vendor in the eyes of the federal government. However, myself and our other local representatives at the higher levels have stressed that the federal government should take another look at ACFO, but ultimately there's some bureaucratic hoops that need to be jumped through first. But we are hopeful that some, you know, restored relationship could potentially come back.
Great.
Councillor Good?
Thank you. Through you, that actually answered part of my question, which came from, was that discussed in the meeting with IRRC in regards to ACFO versus this LSS group? I know certainly from my own employer as well at CIS that I've heard wonderful things about what ACFO has been doing for the asylum seekers that are at Dev Center, and just the relationships that have been built and the support that they've received in the community. So I hope, regardless of the capacity that we have them on, that we're continuing to engage them in that work, because ultimately we want people to stay here and build and grow their lives here. So yeah, you already answered my question.
Actually, one thing I should mention as well, a statistic was provided yesterday that was interesting. About 50% are not successful in their claim to stay in Canada, and at that point they are deported. I am not clear if they're deported to country of origin or previous country of departure before entering the United States, or to the US. But I thought I would share that because that's significant. So.
And apparently we've accommodated 1,400 today.
Yes, that's correct. Since August 2022, we've accommodated over 1,400. Again, that number keeps increasing. At any given time, we have around 800 in the community. For example, but by comparison, I should say, Niagara Falls have had 3,000 pass through their community.
Wow.
Ottawa, I believe, was 700 total. And I don't recall Windsor offhand. I'm sorry. I don't know if you, Councillor Gardner.
Just very quickly, I remember at a council meeting saying that we weren't learning very much for these people. And having been there on Sunday, I was able to answer a couple of phone calls that I received about that because of what I learned at that conference. That was good. Excellent.
Thank you. Council, can I get a, I should have asked for this first, a motion to receive the report. I apologize. Councillor Bennett, Councillor McDonald, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of receiving the report? Carried. Thank you.
going back to the elected officials' expense statements for the period of September 1st to November 30th, 2022, with the recommendation that council receive the statement of expenses for elected officials for the period of September 1st to November 30th, 2022.
Motion to receive, Councilor Gardner, Councilor McDonald. So the reason I pulled this, and I'm sorry to do this at a meeting, but it was already on the agenda. I have an expense listed for the Ontario's Municipal Conference. I asked for that to be refunded, and I have emails confirming it was, so for whatever that's worth. I don't know if the city's received the money yet, but
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll look into it.
I'll forward you the emails. I wasn't able to attend due to another obligation. All in favor of receiving the report? Carried, thank you.
Bylaws 2023-16 to 19, or to 20 inclusive, listed on the agenda, are being presented to council for adoption.
Motion, Councilor Dupel, seconded Councilor Sabourin. All in favor? Carried, thank you.
And we are at reports from standing, advisory, special, and ad hoc committees of council, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Gardner.
Spent 8 hours on a Zoom call with Alpha, which is a health unit association, on Friday, and all the recording that was done for the province and the doctors from all over Ontario. I was pretty proud that it was all done at our place here in Cornwall, and we're at a situation here with the IT that we're looking at trying to get all the advertising from all of Ontario here in Cornwall. We're set up for it. My understanding is that the province was prepared to put $1 million in here. It hasn't been completed yet, but we're working on doing that. I had 4.5 pages of notes from that Zoom conference, and I needed a nap after that one.
Thank you, Councilor Gardner.
No.
Any further reports from standing advisory committees? Seeing none?
There were no notices of motion, Mr. Mayor, so we are at the confirming bylaw.
Motion for the confirming bylaw, please. Councilor Bennett, seconder. Councilor McDonald, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Motion to adjourn. Councilor Bennett, Councilor McDonald, all in favor? Thank you. Thank you for a good meeting, council. Good night when we...